Diabetes with Paul Rosen.
Our diets, our Western diets in America are just really, you just don't realize how poor they really are.
What would you say to others who would like to feel better?
Sometimes you need to find the instruction. That's where the testing and everything comes in, because without that knowledge, there's no way I could have got to the point where I'm at today.
Straight talk about health.
And then I start preaching and telling them what I've been doing. And this guy named Paul Rosen has changed my life.
With your host, Paul Rosen. By the way, the information contained in this program is not approved by the FDA, nor intended to treat, diagnose, or claim to cure any medical condition or disease as defined by Western medicine. However, skilled practitioners of many disciplines have found nutrition response testing to be a highly reliable supportive technology for assessing the health and fitness of the body's functional system.
Okay, this thing about women in Canada who work longer hours having a greater risk of diabetes.
Yeah, what is that all about? I wasn't ready to talk about that.
But I think it's mostly because they're putting greater stress on their bodies. And so if you put that stress on your body, you are, of course, making yourself more susceptible to any number of illnesses. And if we are, as a culture around the world, becoming more susceptible to diabetes, I think that all ties together, don't you?
Well, it does. Unfortunately, the emphasis on stress is not exactly what you'd think. It starts with what you put in your mouth.
But stress is a factor.
Stress can be a tipping point factor.
So
but it's not the factor.
Why are so many of us around the world developing diabetes, especially adults? I mean,
because of your diet. Your diet sucks. It's a problem. It's the biggest problem. It's the foundational problem. Because all of the professionals that have been responsible for setting the guidelines in this country don't understand the condition. They don't understand what causes it, what it is in general. Most professionals believe it's a blood sugar problem. It's not. It's an actual sensitivity problem to insulin and leptin, which are two hormones. And so when you understand the basis of it, right, then the what it is and how to solve it becomes very clear. I mean, the statistics are really extraordinary. Basically, almost a third of the population, a third of the United States population, is either pre-diabetic or diabetic.
That's astounding. That's incredible. That's hundreds of millions of people.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's exploding on all levels, especially in the youngest population, children, and in the oldest population, 60 years and older.
I understand, though, that it's happening at all age groups, and it's amazing to me that you can live your life, in a relatively healthy manner, then suddenly get into your 40s and 50s and you're diagnosed with diabetes. In 2015, the estimates were something like slightly greater than 30 million Americans, or 9.4% of the population, had diabetes. And then there was another number of adults and children ranging in the millions, the tens of the millions, that were yet undiagnosed. And how do we define pre-diabetic? What does that mean exactly?
Pre-diabetes is basically a non-insulin dependent condition where the A1C is beginning to increase. People who have diabetes will know what the A1C marker is when you have a general blood test done.
So that's
also elevated.
That can be measured, right?
Yeah. Also elevated cholesterol, elevated blood pressure, elevated triglycerides. These are all indications that you're on your way.
Is A1C a measurement of sugar in your blood or something like that? And I don't know at all. So.
I mean, technically speaking, anybody can go to the web and just type in what is A1C, and you'll have, the definition or the origin of it.
So somebody who knows what they're doing could look at that and then look at you and say, hey, you're at risk of diabetes.
The key here is if you're noticing any elevation of any of those markers, blood pressure, triglycerides, cholesterol, then you're well on your way to a diabetic condition.
Would there be any physical symptoms, and I suspect they're too general to necessarily say they're indicators of diabetes, but would you show any physical symptoms such as fatigue that might tell you that you're on the road to becoming a diabetic?
Well, it's a good question. The problem is fatigue can be caused by, a million different things. So the way to know is if you're consuming sugar, then you're likely to be on your way to a pre-diabetic condition. If you're consuming...
Hang on. I'm typing those figures into the web here, and it looks like that would be 100% of individuals consuming sugar.
Exactly, which is why the population, so much of the population is headed in the diabetic condition. It's crazy to think that hundreds of millions of people around the world are diabetic or headed that way, and in the United States, over a third of the population is that way. And for people who think that eating fruit is a way to prevent the diabetic condition, remember, when I'm saying diabetic condition, I'm talking about insulin resistance. Insulin resistance. The medical community basically has accepted the fact that diabetes is a blood sugar problem. It isn't. The latest research shows it is not a blood sugar problem. That is an unintended consequence of the problem of sensitivity to insulin and leptin.
So when you say blood sugar, I should say fruit sugar is not a substitute, is that a separate issue, or are there people who actually believe that if they have a susceptibility to sugar, they can just eat fruit sugar instead of regular sugar and therefore decrease their risk of diabetes?
Which is completely false. That's the way you put it. It's perfect. It's completely false.
And that's a misconception that many are operating under.
It's a misconception.
All right, so stop doing that. I might be one of those guys. I wasn't necessarily by buying a truckload of peaches thinking that I was going to put myself at lesser risk of diabetes, but I just thought, hey, it's fruit. It's good.
Yeah, and for a lot of reasons, the misdirection, misunderstanding, it makes it that way. It gives you the impression that if you're going to consume something sweet, fruit would be the better option.
So are we as consumers then making what we think are healthy choices which turn out not to be healthy? And in particular, are many trying to make healthier choices regarding diabetes and making mistakes?
Yes, that's exactly right. You see, because when you understand that diabetes is actually a insulin resistance situation, what happens is you eat something that's got some sugar content in it. There's an index called the glycemic index, which is basically a hierarchy of foods. Highest on the list are foods that cause the body to produce more insulin. Lower on the hierarchy are foods that cause the body to produce less insulin. And what happens is when you consume sugar, basically your body produces insulin, which is calls on the liver to do its thing. And in particular, what happens is that if there's an overage, according to your body, then the body will begin to store the excess as fat.
They're storing the excess sugar or the excess insulin? Okay, the excess sugar.
Yes.
Is stored as fat.
Yes.
Okay. And that's obviously going to manifest itself in your fatness.
Correct. Which is another reason why those folks who are taking insulin, who are insulin-dependent diabetics, right, are actually doing themselves a disservice with respect to the underlying root cause of the condition, because the insulin that they're taking will continue to push the liver to store the sugar in fat.
So in trying to alleviate one problem, you're creating a series of other issues?
Indeed. That's just one of them. In 2015, I guess these facts are so in my face. They're so overwhelming. It's just hard to imagine. But in 2015, that's what I have as far as the numbers go. over 84 million Americans age 18 and older were pre-diabetics. 84 million.
That's a lot of people.
It's huge. It's huge. And the consequences of diabetes are so overwhelmingly nasty, right? That you could be, creating, the condition overall. In other words, the degenerative process is occurring as you're sneaking up to ultimately being labeled with the condition diabetes, right? Pre-diabetes is something that isn't, nobody goes around, doctor doesn't say, oh, you're pre-diabetic until you're almost a diabetic.
Now, if you are pre-diabetic, Paul, would that manifest itself in other symptoms, like I said, fatigue or any number of other things?
It would, but the symptoms are so varied. Brain fog, fatigue, weakness, having problems concentrating. And there's so many others too. But the root cause or the origin of those symptoms could be any one of a million things.
Right.
So it's
and also, would it manifest itself in terms of your diet? Would you have cravings, for example, for sugary foods or something like that?
Well, that wouldn't necessarily indicate that you're a pre-diabetic, but it would certainly indicate that you are an addict.
For sugar,
right.
which is probably most of us also, to one extent or the other. Even those of us who, like me, despite my fruit consumption, I'm one of those guys who tries to avoid sugar as much as possible.
People think many times that I'm, just completely off the mark when I talk about not eating sugar at all. There are many people who would like to cajole you and recommend that if you're going to eat sugar, eat it in moderation. That would be a better thing to do. And it just isn't. It isn't on any level. No level at all. And if you look in your medical history and you see that you've got diabetes in your family, you are completely out of your mind if you're eating sugar. But unfortunately, there are many, many, many millions of people who have become diabetics who can't see any diabetic history, genetic history.
Is it possible to completely avoid sugar? Is that conceivable?
Absolutely.
At all? It is possible.
Totally. Now, we're talking about when I'm talking sugar, folks, I'm talking about added concentrated sweeteners. So, for example, if you picked up tomato sauce in a jar and you read the ingredients. Now, if you didn't see any added concentrated sweetener, high fructose corn syrup or cane sugar or even or any organic sweetener, right? If you didn't see that at all and you looked at the nutritional facts label and you saw that there was X number of sugar, I'm not talking about that. A tomato has sugar in it. All right, onions have sugar in them. Garlic has sugar in them. Peppers have sugar in them.
Sure, that was my point.
No.
With the question is that almost everything has sugar in it.
Well, not almost everything, but everything does get converted to sugar in the body because it's the major source of energy for your body to function. So yes, there should, but I'm talking about added concentrated sweeteners. That's number one. Number two, then I'm talking about looking at the glycemic index. The glycemic index, as I indicated, is basically a hierarchy rated list of foods from those that contain more inherent natural sugars from those that don't. So you have the option of choosing from a glycemic index the foods that are low in sugar as well. So that's kind of a 1 and 2. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes, I do.
The one is added concentrated sugars, and the other is the natural sugars that come within the food itself.
So you're trying to get to the lowest scale on both of those, right?
Exactly. So, for example, a diabetic would avoid concentrated sweeteners 100%. 100%. And the foods that they would eat would be very low on the glycemic index. So potatoes wouldn't be a good food to be eating that's high on the glycemic index.
Yes, and I've gone to the Harvard Health website, and they have a whole list of foods here and their ratings on the glycemic index.
Yeah, and the only thing you have to be careful about that is that most websites that are somehow connected to the Western medical paradigm will recommend that that if you exceed your limit of sugar intake, just use more insulin. Or if it's your birthday and you'd like to have a piece of chocolate cake, by all means do, no problem. But just use more insulin.
It sounds like they're saying you can build a bigger fire as long as the bucket of water nearby is big, too.
That is a good analogy, yes. Yeah, let's start the fires and see if we've got enough fire extinguishing equipment to put it out. And of course, the answer to that question is you never do. You never do. For the very reason that I talked about, right? Because even if you use, artificial insulin or the prescription drug insulin, what are you doing? One of the side effects is you're causing your body to produce more fat.
So I think the answer here, based on what you're saying, Paul, is don't go ahead and have things that are high, have foods that are high on the glycemic index based on the idea that you can take a curative, more insulin, and make that okay. The whole idea is to avoid those foods higher on the index, go for the foods which are lower, and therefore be healthier.
Yeah, that to begin with, as I talk about many times in the show, there's only one diet, and that's your diet. And your diet is specific to you. There's no way for me to give you just a general diet and be certain that your outcome, the correction of any condition, any health condition, would occur without actually evaluating you using the nutrition response testing technology to find out what your particular nutritional deficiencies and barriers to healing are. So that's really important. Personalized nutritional healing is the key to successful natural healing.
Once you're diagnosed as diabetic, Paul, with that idea in mind that you have a personal set of needs, are you doomed, therefore, to have to avoid all the foods you may enjoy, which may have some sugar content?
I think that's kind of a little bit, a heavy-handed way to describe it. Doomed? I mean, if you knew that there was always a susceptibility for you.
Well, you know why I use that word. For some people, if they can't have their stack of pancakes, for example, they're doomed.
Then they're doomed. Yeah.
And maybe that's something we all have to mentally condition ourselves to understand is you're not doomed necessarily because you can't have a tall stack anymore at Denny's twice a week.
It's a life misunderstanding. When you note that there is some limitation, right? Don't get hung up by the limitation. Don't even focus on the limitation. Just expand on what you can do, right? There's so many foods that you can consume, even as a diabetic, without any harmful consequence whatsoever. You just have to know what those things are, and you have to be willing to explore a little bit. Not a ton, just a little bit. But you have to know what your personal restrictions might be, and also the environmental impact.
One more note, you can get a free chapter of Paul Rosen's book, The Missing Piece. Just go to his website, acunatural.com, acunatural.com, and fill out the dialog box that pops up. Rest assured, no information you provide will ever be shared with anyone else. So, what are you waiting for? Get going on your personal road to wellness today.